Hi, this is Charlie, and this is my video blog about the Student's Guide to Performance Studies. And in this video blog, I'm going to try and touch on the main ideas of this reading, and then I'm also going to ask some questions at the end that I'm interested in exploring further. So let's get started. So this guide has no author, so I'm just going to refer to the author as the author, and hopefully that'll work. The guide offers an overview of performance studies writ large, looking at the basic facets of performance studies as an academic discipline, essentially. Big picture-wise, it says that performance studies is many, many things, and it does many, many things, and that it is really hard to define, and that the fact that it's hard to define is actually one of its strengths. The author says on the first page that performance studies is hard to pin down, quote, precisely because of the ephemeral nature of its subject, performance. And I take that to mean that performance is something that is here and then it's gone. It's here and then it's gone. And so that's the ephemerality of it, that it doesn't sit still like a book or a sculpture. And because of that ephemerality, it's hard to pin down exactly what it is because it's gone as soon as it happens. And I think that's really, really interesting. That means that performance studies offers more questions than answers, and also becomes the kind of academic discipline where indeterminacy and uncertainty are embraced. And it appeals to that sort of rebel thread of performance studies. I really like the quotation on the first page where she talks about that performance studies is an after-school program for bad boys and girls. And that's exactly because of this intellectual commitment to indeterminacy and uncertainty that is connected directly to performance studies. So from there, the author addresses several different points. First of all, talking about performance as the subject of the discipline, the thing that the discipline is looking at, sort of like psychology is looking at the way people's brains kind of work, or psychology works. Sociology looks at how societies work. Biology looks at biological processes. Well, performance studies looks at performance. So what does performance mean? The author notes on page 4 that performance studies thinks that a theatrical dimension underlines all human activity. Therefore, any event, action, or behavior can be studied as performance, and a scholar can investigate the various processes that go into making up that performance. Pretty interesting. And then from there, they start talking about why you should study performance. And the answer essentially seems to be that studying performance helps you better understand performance and helps you understand culture. Now, why would it be important to understand performance and culture better? Well, part of the reason that it might be important to understand performance and culture better is because, according to the reading, performance is at the center of all kinds of different things that are happening in the world. So they talk a lot. The author talks a lot about anthropologists Victor Turner and Richard Schechner, who both understood ritual as performance and also translated that understanding into avant-garde theater. And these two guys, it seems like, were central in understanding everyday life kinds of things as performance. So anything from a religious ritual like a Catholic mass to a football game and the chants and the habits and behaviors that happen within that structure, all these things could be understood as performance. And that's really different than thinking about performance as fine art. Further on, they talk about a couple different other ways of thinking about performance. First of all, thinking about performance as speech acts, and they talk about J.L. Austin, who talked about performance as or speech acts as something that makes something so. So when you promise someone, you say, hey, I'm going to be home at 10 o'clock tonight, then you've made that speech act that makes that thing so. Or when someone says, you're under arrest, or I now pronounce you man and wife, or I take this person to be my lawfully wedded husband. All these kinds of things are speech acts. They are speech that makes something happen. And so it's speech that performs. The article also talks about gender and race as being performances, referring specifically to Judith Butler, and thinking about the ways in which we produce our gender through enactments, through behaviors, through performances. And that's really, really different than thinking about gender as being something that is innate or is inborn inside of a person. And that's still really a controversial idea, it seems like, but that's part of that performance studies tradition. And then at the end, they even talk about the idea of technology and whether technology can function as performance. And I think that's really interesting. This article is obviously kind of old. It's not brand new. And when we think about the idea of bots and so forth and all of the digital machinery that is, or digital items that are inside of our computers and are talking to us and so forth, I think it's interesting to think about whether or not they can function as performance. So a couple of questions that I have. Number one, I really like the section on page 12 about performative writing, and they talk a little bit about Della Pollock. Performative writing is that writing that brings forth the feeling of the event. And I want to think more about how we could do that, how we could write about performance in such a way that brings the feeling of the performance alive. That seems really different than like the way that you're taught to write in like English composition, where it's this sort of objective, expository kind of thing. This is highly subjective and expressive and almost poetic, and I think that's really cool. Number two, I want to talk more about the critics on page 14 who say that if everything is performance, is anything performance? If everything's performance, doesn't that just expand the boundaries to a point where the idea of performance studies is kind of meaningless? And then finally, I want to think about whether or not it's really healthy to have such a confusing disciplinary identity. Is it a good idea for a discipline to be so confused about what its purpose is or what its definition is? I like the idea, as I said at the beginning, of it being this after-school program for bad boys and girls, but one wonders if that means that it's going to be seen as like not legitimate by other academic disciplines. So that's my thinking about the Student's Guide to Performance Studies and my summary of it and some questions. And I hope you enjoyed this video blog, and I'll see you later. Bye.